Donald Trump told U.S. senators last week that the most important thing they could do right now to honor the monumental November 5th vote by the American people is to get his team in place. The first confrontation between the old, failed, incompetent, and thoroughly evil regime we have lived under and the emergent one promising a return to America's sovereignty, creativity, prosperity, and fundamental goodness occurs this week with Senate hearings for key Trump nominees. We promise you full coverage of these hearings this week. On the morning of each hearing we will pose 5 fundamental questions which we think reflect Donald Trump's agenda and its potential, which we would like asked and answered. We'll then give you a wrap of what happened at that hearing. On Tuesday, Pete Hegseth, Trump's nominee to head the Pentagon, goes before the Armed Services Committee. The Pentagon sits, of course, at the center of what President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. Somehow that description now seems far too nice. I prefer the famous 1933 speech by Major General Smedley Butler, "War is a Racket," in which he described the use of military force to secure raw materials and cheap labor for multinational corporations. That is, the British system of economic looting, rather than the American system of constantly rising labor productivity and power and development. While Butler named American corporations as lead parts of this, the real story here is that since 1989, we have been waging endless wars on behalf of British geopolitical interests, not our own. Hence, the Pentagon has a bloated budget which fails audits each and every time because no one really knows where the money goes. Its contractors in charge of making weapon systems and training troops can't produce hypersonic weapons like the Russians or the Chinese, or a defense to them, particularly to drone warfare, because they are more interested in their stock price than the creative innovation necessary to actually defend the country. Its last leaders live in a land of fantasy and delusion. Mark Milley, Lloyd Austin say we've won the heroic war in Ukraine, where the reality is, like every other war waged since 1989, we've lost it, although there's been thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in profits to the military-industrial complex. They have made DEI the central focus of the troops. Recruitment is way, way down because of the rot they have hurled in our name, as well as the general degradation through lack of physical fitness and drugs of our younger population. The troops come back from these forever wars damaged both mentally and physically. Suicide is the hot topic now. With all of that of importance on the agenda for Pete Hegseth, what the Democrats want to talk about is Pete Hegseth's sex life and whether he drank too much at parties many, many years ago. The other big days this week will be Wednesday and Thursday. On Wednesday, hearings for Pam Bondi as Attorney General, Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, John Radcliffe as Director of the CIA, and Russ Vought at the all-important and key post of Bureau and Management and Budget will kick off. On Thursday, we shift from the potential to drain the national security swamp and de-weaponize the government to the economy, with hearings for Scott Bessent at Treasury and Lee Zeldin at EPA. The most controversial and, in our view, significant nominees are being stalled through a variety of smear campaigns and delaying tactics. Tulsi Gabbard will be on the Hill all week meeting with senators, with her hearing to become the new Director of National Intelligence, scheduled hopefully next week. As I emphasized last week and the week before, the British and the lobbyists are those opposing her. It's unclear when Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s hearing will occur, and senators are stating that Kash Patel's hearing at FBI will be sometime in February. This, of course, is outrageous. The senators who are opposing these nominees and delaying them are all controlled by lobbyists, many of them foreign. In the case of Gabbard and Patel, it is obvious to see how a truth teller like Gabbard at DNI or Patel at FBI and holding the keys to the nation's secrets would terrify congressmen who have been under the thumb and protection of the intelligence agencies for years because of their personal scandals, and because it is those senators precisely who have waged the war against the American presidency and Donald Trump. RFK Jr., of course, stands to rein in and reform a health complex in the United States, which now exists to make tons of money from chronic diseases rather than preventing and curing those very diseases. The Trump transition is using the power of the election itself and carrots to rein in the dumb and corrupt instincts of the Republican senators who have traditionally opposed Trump. And the power of that election is indeed a powerful way to actually remind people of where true power actually lies, with the people. It's also possible, as the Democratic Party continues to flail and fail, that some Democrats will break ranks and vote for these nominees. Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania seems to be leading a group of Senate Democrats who are exploring being faithful to the mandate given by the American people on November 5th. Fetterman just met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago and declared himself happy with the meeting. However, it will still be that recalcitrant Republicans may have to be confronted with being primaried, having their donors dry up, or being investigated and exposed if they continue to stand in the way. So stay tuned. We'll see how this battle goes. It will be a monumental one, a very important one, which will go down in history. This week will go down in history. Trump has also promised at least 100 executive orders on day one. He is warning that Biden has left him a dumpster file of huge debts, seemingly intractable wars, and a massive deportation agenda to deal with. And Biden is increasing all of the craziness of this before he leaves office. So there won't be an immediate turn around to the crisis which we are experiencing and confronting as a nation. It will take a lot of work and a mobilized population to get it done. But we have faith that you out there know that already and that you're going to come in and man the battlefront. As of this morning, the California fires continue to rage, with warnings that they could expand as the winds pick up again. This will probably be the largest fire disaster in American history. And the stupid California officials who basically caused this, like Newsom and Karen Bass, are blaming Donald Trump for saying what the causes actually are. As we have emphasized with others, it is the fitting bookend to the end of the fanatic cult of Malthusianism and its enforcement twin, environmentalism, which creates economic and cultural conditions similar to the Middle Ages. Recall petitions on Governor Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass are now circulating and picking up signatures in the thousands because of their gross incompetence and adherence to ideologies which inevitably kill people. On the world front, Putin and Trump have scheduled a meeting right after Trump comes in, but the Biden administration continues its very dangerous effort to save its legacy through the war drives in Ukraine in the Middle East. J.D. Vance emphasized in his TV appearances that the economic and national security mess which the puppeteers who are controlling Joe Biden are leaving is a big one. Trump has announced, of course, that he'll meet with Putin. He's also, very importantly, said that Biden caused this war, that having Ukraine join NATO caused this war, that it was provocative and upended something the Russians have been fighting about with the United States and Britain for years. The Ukraine war will escalate over the weeks before this meeting between Putin and Trump, as both sides hurl horrible assaults at one another in order to position themselves for peace talks. Somehow this is presented as rational to us. Apparently, that is how these things go, particularly since Biden's controllers remain committed to maximum destruction of Russia, even if it means entirely destroying Ukraine in the process. Last week, the Biden administration sanctioned every single aspect of Russia's oil production and distribution capacity, saying that they did so to weaken the Russian war machine. That will almost inevitably raise the price at the pump here. A very sound argument can be made that Biden's previous theft of Russian assets frozen soon after Russia went into Ukraine in 2022 to use as a loan to Ukraine, which they have actually done, created massive instability in the dollar and contributed to the inability to sell treasuries throughout the world, a big component of our present inflation. Countries fled the dollar, fearing that they would suffer a similar fate as Russia. There are again rumblings this morning coming out of the Middle East, positive rumblings about a possible peace between Israel and Hamas, based on peace talks now taking place in Doha. This follows Trump's threat that all hell will break loose unless the hostages are released, requiring, obviously, a deal here. It's a threat he reiterated 2 days ago. Otherwise, the British are intent on continuing their program of religious war throughout this area and using the resulting destabilization to manipulate oil, gas, and other raw materials markets from this area of the world. Yemen now, in addition to the now permanently destabilized Syria, is the area of action for their plans this week. Clean break, a policy you may remember from the Bush administration, which led to the disastrous war in Iraq, is the policy, destabilization of every single nationalist or independent regime in the Middle East, putting them under the empire's thumb. Now, despite the hair-on-fire reaction of our corrupt media, it also seems like Donald Trump Jr.'s trip to Greenland last week was a success, as the leader there, Knut Igadi, says he wants to negotiate Greenland's future status with Trump, not the Danish royals. In terms of understanding this week in the context of our overall situation, I highly recommend that people listen to the class which Bruce Director and Tony Papert gave on Saturday. It's up on the Promethean Action website. They describe the period of 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, forward as the period in which the United States totally ceded its sovereignty to the globalist entity which houses itself in Britain. Most of the other advanced sector nations did the same thing. That occurred at a time when the elite families had decided that nuclear war was no longer an issue, since the Soviet Union had fallen, and they could afford to dispense with the type of industrial economy and educated population required for the potential to fight peer-to-peer wars. We are going through a massive transformation now, occasioned by the victory of Donald Trump, but reflected throughout the world, in which the once destroyed sovereign nation state is reemerging. And the corrupt system we have lived under, really since the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1971, is dying by its own incompetent hand. When looking at the LA fires, it's useful to reflect on the fact that the environmentalist religion which caused these fires is, as I said before, really the enforcement mechanism for Malthusianism or population control. It's useful to remember that Prince Philip desired to be reincarnated as a deadly virus for purposes of controlling population. They envisioned small populations deprived of any information but that they chose to give them as the ultimate utopian paradise for the elites. They called it, in 1989, the end of history. Philip's edicts were derived from Lord Bertrand Russell, the philosopher king of the recent British Empire. He said once, and I quote, "Bad times, you say, are exceptional and can be dealt with by exceptional methods." This has been more or less true during the honeymoon period of industrialism, but it will not remain true unless the increase of population of the world is enormously diminished. War, so far, has had no great effect on this increase, which continued through each of the world wars. War has been disappointing in this respect, but perhaps bacteriological war may prove more effective. If a Black Death could spread to the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. The state of affairs may be somewhat unpleasant. What really high-minded people are indifferent to happiness, especially other people's. That's Bertrand Russell from The Impact of Science Upon Society, pages 102 to 104. What a perfect reflection on the mindset of those who are failing and fading now versus the new world Donald Trump is creating. At the deepest level, the train wreck J.D. Vance said yesterday we have been left to encounter and fix involves demographic collapse caused by exactly these policies. We are not procreating enough to replace existing populations. Without population growth at wage levels appropriate to a one-parent household, no economy can be said to really be functioning. That's one of the topics we'll take up on Thursday when the economy becomes the issue in the Senate. Susan Kokinda will be here on Wednesday to give you the midweek wrap, and I'll see you again on Saturday. Thanks very much for listening. I'm Barbara Boyd. I'll see you again on Saturday.
Thanks for watching. Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.